Right.
It's a really good piece.
Oh, thank you. It's nice of you.
Yes.
Hey, Michel.
Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome everyone. My name is Michel Belleval. I'm the chairman of AmCham Quebec. On behalf of the board of AmCham, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you joining us for the webinar titled State of America Discussion, the Upheaval and the Race for the Presidency. Today's discussion comes at a critical time as we witness significant development in the U.S. presidential race. The political landscape is shifting rapidly, and understanding this change is crucial for anyone interested in U.S. politics and its global implication. We're fortunate today to have with us three distinguished experts who will share their insight and perspective on the current state of the race. Their analysts will provide us with a deeper understanding of the forces at play and what we might expect in the months ahead. Without further ado, I will now turn the floor over to Tom Creary, the founder of AmCham Quebec and the visionary behind this webinar series. Tom, the floor is yours.
Oh, merci, Michel. Thank you. Bonjour tout le monde. Je vous accueille au nom de tout le groupe d'AmCham Québec, welcoming you here as well, along with Michel. And first of all, what I'd like to do, I'd like to extend to thank the fine Canadian law firm of McCarthy Tétrault, their office here in Montreal, for providing support to this venture, which allows us to offer this participation by everyone free as a public service. And so thank you, McCarthy Tétrault, and for this. And I'd also like to thank the Conseil des Relations Internationales de Montréal, Montreal Council on Foreign Relations, CORIM, and the Conseil du Patronat du Québec for their collaboration in putting this out into their networks so people can know that this is going on. And without further ado, I'd like to go forward here and introduce the co-moderator, la co-modératrice, Monique Jérome-Forget, que vous connaissez tous, j'imagine. She's well known as in politics here in Quebec, and she was a minister of finance of Quebec, as many of you know very well. And she and I will be coordinating the discussion with our panelists, and I get and I'll introduce them right now. Gerald Seib is the former executive Washington editor of the Wall Street Journal, and he was previously the Washington bureau chief. There's something like an echo here. Is that somebody? Maybe we could. Somebody has to mute. But anyway, Jerry appears regularly on networks such as CNBC, Fox Business Network, CNN, the BBC, as a commentator on Washington affairs, and he is the author of the 2020 book, which is very pertinent to what we're going to discuss today. We Should Have Seen It Coming: From Reagan to Trump, a Front Row Seat to a Political Revolution. Jackie Calmus is the opinion columnist for the Los Angeles Times, and she is, before joining the Times in 2017 as White House editor, she worked at the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, covering the White House, Congress, and national politics. She is also the author of a pertinent book to the discussion today, Dissent: The Radicalization of the Republican Party and Its Capture of the Court, referring to the Supreme Court. And then David Shribman, who many of you have seen before, along with Jerry on our previous sessions. David was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1995 for his coverage of Washington and the American political scene. He has occupied the positions of executive editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and he was the assistant managing editor and Washington bureau chief of the Boston Globe. He's a dual citizen of Canada and the United States. His family, part of his family is from Montreal, and he teaches a course at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University on the American presidency. So he is well versed in what has happened over time in history, the American presidency. And so what I will do now is I will start the question and answer the discussion with our panelists, and I've asked Monique to perhaps get the ball rolling with an initial question to the panelists, and each one you can be a pretty freewheeling sort of a way to start this. And please, Jerry, David, Jackie, chime in on aspects that we're talking about subsequent to these questions. Monique, over to you. À vous.
Merci, Tom. Thank you very much. Also, I want to join Tom to say that I'm very pleased to be with such an impressive panel. You are, the three of you, spectacular in terms of your involvement in the U.S. politics. My first question, really, perhaps the three of you will want to join on that question, because a number of commentators state that this election is perhaps the most critical in terms of the direction that the U.S. will take in the future, perhaps as important as, more important since the Civil War in 1860. Is that an overreaction? Is that an overstatement? I'll start with you, Jerry, and perhaps the Jackie and David can follow on that.
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having us. I'm happy to be here and to be back, Tom. Thank you for having us. Hyperbole is a kind of a common thing in political discourse in this country. And so there's probably a little bit of hyperbole in what you just said, but not all that much. I mean, if you think about what will be determined this fall, the Democrats will decide whether they're ready to make a generational change, which they kind of have done. The Republicans will have to decide whether they are or not the party of Trump, and they kind of already have. And the election will determine which of those things actually happens as the prevailing force in American politics. Is it Trumpism, or is it a new version of the Democratic Party? And that's pretty fundamental. I think the overriding concern is whether the institutions survive. The institution of the electoral process almost broke in 2020. Will it survive this election? I think that's the open question. And if it does, even if it does, will the country accept what happens here? In other words, you actually literally have people now who say they'll take to the streets if their party loses the election, particularly on the Trump side, on the Republican side. That maybe that's a far-fetched possibility, but it's not a 0% possibility that will happen. And what worries me is I do not believe that if Donald Trump loses the election, he will accept the results again. I just don't think he will. So that's the nightmare scenario I worry about, which is that he simply refuses once again to accept the results of an election that he loses. And by the way, remember the way the American political system works. If the Democrats win, the results are to be certified in the House of Representatives, and presiding over those proceedings will be Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, I mean, there are all kinds of conspiracy theories baked into that scenario. And I really do worry, and to go back to your original question, that's why people say the stakes are so high. Can the system once again survive these pressures?
What about you, Jackie?
I would like to, well, first of all, I'm flattered to be included in this group and to speak to the very influential people that are on this call. I know it's more interesting to get disagreement, but I agree with just everything Jerry said. And to keep it short, I'll just say that I too don't like to say that something's the worst, the first, the best. But this is right up there, this election, in terms of the most important, most consequential in our history. And I agree that, it's just been transformed by Joe Biden's decision to step off the ballot. And I am of a mind that Donald Trump's defeat and broader defeats down the ballot for Republicans is about the only thing that will cause the Republican Party to moderate. They've had a number of losses on his watch in 2018, 2020, 2022. the odd numbered years as well. And it hasn't, usually in our politics, that causes a party to, you know, to rethink and to reform. And that hasn't happened in the Republican Party, but I think a significant defeat of Donald Trump and Democrats holding the House, down ballot races, wins for the Democrats is really the only thing. I have very little confidence about Democrats holding on to the Senate, but that's a different story. But I do think, you know, the only thing that Trumpism should be exercised from our politics. I think that's unlikely altogether, but the way to start is defeat all the way down the ballot.
David,
Well, I've actually looked back on the phrase "most important election in our history," and you can't imagine how many times that's been described. And the last, I remember particularly vividly, 40 years ago, the Mondale-Reagan election, which was described as the most important in our history. Of course, Reagan won 49 states, and that was the last time, I believe, that the Republican candidate has won a majority of the popular vote. But in terms of the most critical election in American history, I would vote instead for 1860 and 1788. Not Jackie, because she's younger than we are, but Jerry and I covered the 1788 election, and it was a corker. Actually, that's when Washington was first elected. But 1860 was the election of in a four candidate field of Lincoln, and within a month, some states had seceded, and 10 of the 11 states that were to secede had seceded before he took the oath of office. So unless we have a situation like that, I'm going to vote for 1860.
Well, wasn't the question the most important election or most critical election since 1860? Because otherwise I wouldn't.
That's the case, and I'll go for that. I'll go for that. There were some critical ones since then, 1932 and others, but that's pretty good. I think so. But I remind you that 1860 is a tough one to beat.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would agree with you.
Monique, can I add one thing here, just to sort of set the table? We tend to focus, everybody in the political conversation, just about in the circles we run in, tend to focus on why people who oppose Donald Trump see this election in such dire terms. I think it's important to remember that people who support Trump see it in dire terms as well. I mean, they actually believe that if Trump doesn't win, a sort of a radical leftist version of the Democratic Party will take over, will proceed to shatter all kinds of American institutions. The introduction of LGBTQ rights will take over our schools. Religion will be excised from the public square. The support for Hamas will explode. Support for Israel will go away, and the culture of America will be defined downward permanently. So I just want to lay that out there, that this is on both sides. It's not just people who fear Donald Trump winning, it's also people who fear Donald Trump losing who see this election in very dire terms.
And I would add one more thing in support of Jerry's point, and that is the people in the Republican Party are just as concerned about the future of democracy as the people on the Kamala side. And I think that is what everybody says is at stake here, but that is the only area in which both sides agree. They both agree that the future of democracy is on the ballot here.
okay, moving on here. Seems to be a lot of momentum for Kamala Harris. Just how big is that momentum, for you folks in Washington? And it seems to be very big, but where is it coming from? Is it coming from, is it coming from younger people? Is it coming from the African Americans and the suburbs? Do you see it continuing in terms of that? Is this something that's sustainable in your view?
Well, let me take that one on. Most candidates who go into their convention, as Vice President Harris is going to do on Monday, come out of it with a sense of unity. She's going into it with a sense of unity. It's an unusual phenomenon. She's basically turned it upside down. Now I'm sitting here about a mile from where she's going to have a rally on Sunday in Pennsylvania, which is probably the most critical of the critical states. I was looking at the internals of the polls for Pennsylvania yesterday, and the Tom, to your point, the percentage of young people, which we'll define as 18 to 39, for her, astonishing. Every single age group in Pennsylvania, except for 39 to 59, support her in huge numbers. And I don't understand why that middle group goes the reverse, but there's a huge amount of younger people, younger voters, and by younger, I'd say under 40, who do support her. And of course, the African-American community and females as well.
So they're losing it could be said that he's losing whatever support that I'm talking about Trump here. He is eroding whatever support he had managed to gain with younger people and with the Black community on his economic supposed record. Is that fair enough to say, David?
I think that's fair enough to say, and also that the assassination attempt, which gave him a little bit of a boost, seems to be yesterday's conversation.
So let me throw some cold water on the Kamala wagon here. Look, there's been a huge improvement in Democratic fortunes over the last 3 weeks since the switch. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we did a poll, the Wall Street Journal did a poll shortly after the switch was made, and we found an astonishing number there that before the switch was made, when Joe Biden was the presumptive Democratic nominee, only 37% of Biden voters said they were enthusiastic about their choice. After Kamala took over, 81% of her supporters said they were enthusiastic. I mean, that's over a 2-week period. Those numbers just don't happen in polling. So that's the good news for Democrats. I mean, they've reunited the party and they've created enthusiasm. But I think it's important to keep in mind that after all that, this race is still essentially tied. It's tied nationally and it's tied in almost every one of the 7 key swing states. And it's also important to remember that, so in other words, Kamala Harris hasn't surged ahead here. She's gotten back to where Democrats should have been in the first place. Secondly, it's also important to remember that as much as people have been enthused about Kamala Harris, when you ask about actual issues, and we ask in our poll, people prefer Trump on the issues of immigration, the economy, foreign policy, and crime. Well, that's about 80% of it right there. And the abortion one is the one where people prefer Kamala Harris by a wide margin. But I'm just saying there's a long way to go here. And Kamala Harris stands in this position, which is a good one, after 3 of just about the most perfect weeks in American presidential politics that you can have. It's a long way to go from there, and it's a dead even race.
And I'll just add to that, I think using words like momentum and surging in polls are just not words that should be used when in a electorate that's as polarized and all evenly split as ours is. And Kamala Harris is ahead in polls lately, in the latest this morning that came out from Emerson. But the fact is that Republicans have an advantage in the Electoral College, which is how our presidents gets determined. We've had 2 presidents in the past 24 years who have, Donald Trump and George Bush, who got elected without the popular vote majority. So the fact is, more states have now, the population shift has been to states that favor Trump. So the Electoral College advantage is even worse for Democrats than it was in 2020 or before. So the Democrats have to go in with a polling advantage that's upward 5 or more points in order to be at all confident about winning the Electoral College. There's not a lot of give in the numbers right now. People know Donald Trump, and so they've made up their minds for the most part. So what we're competing for the vote. They're competing for the votes of you know, a few 100,000 voters in the
froze.
6 battleground states.
I froze, Tom.
Okay, what's that?
Okay, sorry. I was freezing. I'm having problems with my internet this morning. It so happens when you're not supposed, it's not supposed to happen. Listen, there's no doubt from certainly our view here in Canada that Kamala Harris is doing very well right now. She's repositioned the party. What could trip her? What is it? What are the issues where she could be vulnerable? And, you know, as they say, the higher you get, the harder you fall. What could trip her in this for this coming election? I don't know
Let me-
which one of you wants to take over.
Let me start this one last time. She hasn't had a press conference yet. She hasn't stumbled yet, and she will. There hasn't been an unanticipated revelation, and there will be. There hasn't been a clash, a real clash about her vice president, and there will be. There hasn't been real questions asked and answered about how she may differ from Joe Biden, and they will be asked if not answered. None of those things has happened yet, and every one of those things will happen in the next 90 days.
Here's what I worry about too, is when those bad things happen, as they always do in campaigns, how she reacts to them. And I think she's improved mightily in the time she's been vice president as a political character and her retail talents on the stump. But I keep thinking back to the time in her first year as vice president when she went to the Central American countries as part of her portfolio as trying to get to the root causes of migration to the United States at the southern border. And she had an interview with Lester Holt of NBC in which he was pressing her on going to the border, and she just got flustered by this, and not flustered isn't the word. She got defensive and she got sort of angry, and it wasn't a good look. And if she gets like that, if she gets defensive and angry when these things happen, as they will, she could erode a lot of this, you know, the campaign of joy that she's built up till now, and it'll be a much murkier picture.
I think she has 3 potential Achilles heels. One is immigration, which Jackie just mentioned, is a big problem. And she's just going to get absolutely pummeled with Republican ads that say she and Biden are responsible for the biggest influx of illegal aliens in the American history. So that's the one. The second one is inflation. I mean, the fact is that the inflation picture, you know, on the macro level has improved dramatically, including with some numbers that came out yesterday. But most people are not convinced. They're paying a lot more for groceries, for gasoline, for car insurance, for house insurance. And most, you know, millennials and, well, Gen Zers can't buy a house because it's too expensive. So that's a problem. The third one, which I think has been underappreciated so far, is crime. You know, she was a prosecutor in San Francisco. She was kind of a sort of a tough on crime prosecutor. But I had a text exchange with a Republican this week who said, well, the only way we beat Kamala Harris is to Willie Horton her. And David and Jackie will appreciate the reference. This is a reference back to when Michael Dukakis was running against George H.W. Bush for president. And the ad that was fatal to him was one that said, oh, he pardoned a murderer who went out and then committed another murder after he had been pardoned by Michael Dukakis. It was a way to basically portray him as soft on crime and in the pocket of sort of liberal lawyers. And that's going to come. And what's her answer? How significant is that? I don't know. That's a potential problem.
Okay, you know, we talk about the swing states and the importance of the swing states. In other words, however each one of these goes will determine probably the result of the election. And it all has to deal with the amount of electoral college votes, and sometimes many Canadians don't understand how that works, and we won't get into that because that's quite a discussion. But it's safe to say that the votes that are counted in Pennsylvania added up to a certain number of electoral college votes, and the ones in Wisconsin as well, and in Michigan and every other state. And the more populous states have more electoral college votes. Like California has something like 42, and Georgia has, or North Carolina has 17, something like that. Anyway, the states to watch are considered to be Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Is that still the case, Jerry?
Yes. So, but there's 7 really. There's Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, which you mentioned. There's Georgia, which is an interesting state, which we can talk about. North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. So you have 50 states, but 7 will decide the outcome. 3 most important are the upper Midwest ones that you mentioned, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But to give you some idea, everything else is probably sorted out. The other 43 states fit into one column or the other, the Democrats or Republicans. Cook Political Report, which is a nonpartisan political organization that publishes a really useful newsletter, has some poll numbers out this morning that show that among those 7 states, Kamala Harris is now ahead in 5. Donald Trump is ahead in 1, which is in Nevada, and they're tied in Georgia. But every one of these is like within a point or 2, one way or the other. So those are the 7 states to watch. They will determine the outcome. I think that if you want to do the Electoral College math, and you don't get too wonky about it, but she probably needs to win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. By the way, just as a footnote, there's a great scenario that I like to think about. Well, I don't like to think about it, but it's intriguing. If she wins those 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and Donald Trump wins Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada, and every other state performs as expected, there would be a 269 to 269 tie in the Electoral College, and the outcome will be determined by the result in a single congressional district around Omaha, Nebraska, because Nebraska its Electoral College votes by congressional district, not statewide. So if you know how close it is, I'm just telling you, that's not an implausible scenario.
Okay. David, do you have any comment on that? We move on to the next question.
No, the peculiarity of Nebraska and of course of Maine as well. I was in that congressional district a couple of days ago, and that also votes separately, the 2nd congressional district, and that could hold the balance. It has a Democratic House member who votes often with the Republicans, so who knows?
Okay,
Okay, perhaps I should take the next question, Tom.
go ahead.
We have focused up to now on the presidency. What about Congress? What could happen there? Which is very important, of course.
I already mentioned that I don't expect Democrats to hold the Senate. They could, but it would be a big lift, even if the top of the ticket wins, because, it's already closely divided by 1 point. The West Virginia, currently held by Democrat Joe Manchin, he's retiring. It's certain to be won by the current governor, Jim Justice. And so it will be 50-50. And so whoever wins the presidency, because the vice president is the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, that party will control the Senate. But there are two states, my native Ohio and Montana, where Democrats are the incumbent senators up for re-election, and both of them will have a hard time getting re-elected. John Tester in Montana, although if there's any Democrat, he's proven he can get elected and re-elected. But this is a tough year. I mean, Trump will win that state by big double digits. And in Ohio, Sherrod Brown, again, an amazing candidate. And I actually would put my money on him now that Joe Biden is out of the race and there's more energy on the Democratic ticket. These candidates all run ahead of the presidential candidate in the polls, but but it's still a real heavy lift. I would predict Republicans will hold the Senate, will have a 1 seat Senate majority. I think the Democrats will take the House from the Republicans, but that's still far from certain. But the Senate is the most worrisome as far as, I'm concerned, or I think people should be concerned, because that's the body that confirms federal judges. And especially if Trump gets elected, we've already seen the transformation of our courts under a Republican president and a Republican Senate. I guess the bottom line is, if I had to predict, it will have a split Congress with Republican-controlled Senate and a Democratic-controlled House.
Any other views on that, David or Jerry?
That's pretty much how I see it too.
Yeah,
I've got a question. Go ahead,
I would just add one thing that there's an interesting phenomenon that has reemerged here, which is voters who are ticket splitters. You know, there had been a series of elections in which if you were going to vote Republican, you just voted Republican from the top down. Or if you're going to vote Democrat, you just voted Democrat from the top down. That is not really the way it looks this year. We have seen, as Jackie suggested, states in which congressional and Senate races move one way while the presidential race moves the other. So one should not assume that because, say, Donald Trump wins a state, that Republicans will win the battle for the congressional delegation in that state. Voters seem to be much more discerning right now than they have been in that regard.
Okay, something is different with Canadian elections. In the United States, election day is you'll be voting for many different positions. Not only president, you'd be voting for whatever senator of the state is up for re-election, and the member of the House of Representatives, county commissioners, and all of that. Whereas in Canada, you vote in the federal election, it's for your local federal representative, your member of parliament. That's it. And but talking about elections here, I got a question that it appears that Republicans are systematically passing laws and regulations at the state and county level to give them authority to either not certify election results or otherwise prevent a fair election to happen to be counted. And how systematic is this becoming, and how dangerous will it be for arriving at a true election result? I must say to our listeners, the elections in the United States, like I said, are managed, like I said, a very different way. They're managed first at the county level. In other words, if there are 45 counties in West Virginia, there will be 45 different organizations that run their own local elections, including for the president. And and they have local commissioners of elections and all that. But and then what happens there is that if it's certified by the local county commission on vote, the results of the vote are sent to the state level, and the state level has its own process of certifying the results, which go nationally, and then it comes to the House of Representatives, and then for ratification, and then it's the responsibility of the Vice President of the United States to confirm the results as part of the Constitution. But what is this? What's going on here in terms of the systematically passing laws and regulations to counteract this? Is this going on? I think, Jackie, you had a perspective on this that we talked about yesterday.
Yeah, this is something that's been going on in red states, the Republican-dominated states, as well as some purple states where you may have a Democratic governor, say like Wisconsin, but a Republican majority legislature. It's been going on since Trump's first term, when he began casting doubt on American elections and got his supporters all whipped up about election fraud, which is, of course, almost non-existent in this country, except in very scattered instances that have no impact on an election result. So if you've been watching state legislatures in the United States for the last, 8 years or so, every legislative session, election fraud is at the top of the agenda. And several of the battleground states are states where some restrictive voting laws have been passed that, people should be aware of. We could have a county, and, you had hints of this in 2000, like in Michigan, Antrim County, where if, well, let's just take an example. The Georgia, this is very recent, this month, the Georgia Election Board, 3 appointed, not elected members, 2 of whom are pro-MAGA, Trump supporting election board members. And they have passed a rule for the state of Georgia that if a local election official has reasonable reason, and reasonable is undefined, not to certify the election result, then they don't have to, and it can be adjudicated. And so, you know, Georgia's a state we're all watching. Wisconsin has some restrictive laws. Arizona has really cracked down on mail-in voting, and this is a state where more than 75% of Arizonans vote by mail. So you could have an election night where, you know, some obscure local election official casts the whole result in doubt, and it's all based on this idea that there's election fraud when there is not.
You know, Tom, among us panelists, we panelists, we've been covering this stuff for 120 years. And for 100 of them, we paid no attention whatsoever to any of that stuff that you described. We knew that was to be the case. We paid no attention. We just carried on. What you described is why I'm hoping whoever wins in a landslide.
In a landslide, because I think it'll be chaos if not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Will the women of America in the end rise up and deny Trump the presidency to protect reproductive rights? We know that abortion is very much of an issue right now in the US. Do you think it will have an impact? The women can have an impact to come out and vote en masse to support Kamala, for instance?
I think women have shown they have an impact in every election cycle since Donald Trump came on the scene, and to Democrats' advantage. But, you know, it needs to be said that the exit polls show that when it comes to women, majorities of white women support Donald Trump. And that's eroded some, but it's still true. And so I think women, suburban women, college educated women especially, there will be heavy turnout to Kamala Harris's and Democrats' advantage. But and it, you know, could obviously could make the difference, but it just is things are so close that it's hard to say.
It just, you know, excuse me, Monique, but it's just quite surprising to me when I do see that the majority of white women in America have voted for Trump. And given everything that he's said and done and all of that, that's just a passing comment on my part. And
but it really matters, Tom, where those women are. In the poll I looked at yesterday, Quinnipiac poll, quite reliable. In Pennsylvania, the gender gap is huge, like 15 or 18 points in favor of women, in favor of Kamala Harris. And so it matters, as Jerry says, in the 7 states.
Yeah, and I would add an interesting footnote on the gender gap question, which is what's happening among young voters, age 30 and younger. In that age group, there has been a decisive move toward the Democrats. There always was an advantage there. It's become much bigger since Roe v. Wade, the abortion ruling by the Supreme Court. At the same time, though, in that age group, young men have moved fairly decisively toward Trump and the Republicans. So the age gap, the gender gap among younger American voters is really big and profoundly important in this race, and a little hard to explain, to be honest, because it's normally been the case that people in age cohorts, men and women, tended to move in roughly the same direction. That's not happening among younger Americans right now.
Yeah, there was an excellent piece in the Wall Street Journal this week. Jerry, I'm sure we all saw it, by Aaron Zitner and others, about how young men are a huge force in this election. So something to watch.
okay, for me, Monique.
Yeah, it's your turn, Sam.
Okay. Is rural and small town America still a total loss for Democrats? Or is it coming around possibly with Tim Walz and whatever impact he could have in terms of rural voters? I seem to doubt that myself. But Trump doesn't seem to have done much for them when he was president. Why the devotion to him? David, Jerry, Jackie, how do you feel about this sort of thing? It's very a divide between the cities and rural and small town America.
I think Ames, Kansas, favorite son, Jerry Seib should take that.
It's a big gap. I mean, it's a divide, kind of like the one I just described among young men and young women. It's perhaps the most striking, the most stark gap in politics today, which is the rural vote versus the urban and suburban vote. Is it lost for Democrats? No, I don't think so. And I do think Tim Walz is an interesting play at creating confidence and regaining some footing in those communities. And you have to remember, Democrats don't have to win rural voters. They just have to claw back enough of them so that they reduce the Republican advantage. And this is not just in rural states. I mean, I looked at some Census Bureau data last week. The two of the states in the top 7 among most rural residents are Pennsylvania and Michigan. You don't think of those as rural states, and Ohio, also in the top 10. They have among the top 10 most rural citizens in America. Those 3 swing states all land in that list. So we think of those as kind of urban, industrial, Midwest states, but they have a huge amount of rural voters. Democrats are not going to win those districts, but they just have to claw back some of the votes. Why are they losing them? I mean, you talked about whether the Trump administration of policies were good for them or not. Economically, I think it's kind of an open question. But culturally, they just have moved away from where the Democratic Party is. And that's why the Democrats have to win them back, not so much on economic grounds, but on cultural grounds. Make them less afraid of the Democrats, if you will. And that's where I think Tim Walz is useful. He does not look like a scary, wild-eyed liberal crusader. He's not.
And if I could just go ahead, David.
Well, I think Democrats make a big mistake in how and where they campaign. For instance, both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will be here in Pittsburgh on Sunday, as I mentioned. Pittsburgh is 90% Democratic. Coming here is a complete waste of time. They're going to get every Democratic vote anyhow. Why don't they go to Greene County or Westmoreland County, which are heavily Republican, and eat into the Democratic disadvantage, and pull a few votes out of there. Bill Clinton urged that upon his wife in 2016. He went to Aliquippa himself, which is not rural, but down and out kind of, and he urged the Democrats to do this. I think campaigning in places where you're going to get a lot of applause isn't going to help you this time. You want to go to places where you're not going to win.
Yeah, and I would agree that in a lot of ways you can argue that Democrats ceded rural America to the Republicans for just that reason. And I just would like to add one more factor that explains the rural-urban divide, is it goes to our balkanization in media consumption. That the now that you have throughout most of the century a huge conservative media network, led of course by Fox News, you have people going to sources, and to sources a lot more to the right than Fox News even is, but they're consuming, and same on the left, MSNBC, although I don't think there's a direct equation between Fox and MSNBC in terms of reporting truth and reality. But in any case, people in rural America are mostly consuming conservative media, and those in the cities are not. And it affects, it explains a lot of your beliefs. There are things that viewers of Fox News either don't know or don't believe about Democrats or Kamala Harris because they don't hear it, or about Donald Trump because they don't hear it on Fox News. So I think media consumption is a huge factor in our polarization.
Just as people on the left didn't hear very much about the laptop of Hunter Biden, they didn't hear that either. It goes both ways. It's a big problem.
Yeah. No, that's what I say. Yeah.
Monique, over to
It's
you.
more on the right.
Okay, I just wanted to react to David. Sometimes in politics, you need to cheer yourself up a bit. If you go only into places where everybody hates you, it's depressing. So you go into a place where people will applaud you. That was just
I agree, but I don't think Kamala Harris is in need of approbation right now. I mean, every place she goes, she's being celebrated. She should go someplace where she can peel off a couple of votes she wouldn't otherwise get.
Can
I
I
agree.
ask a question in that regard, which I've been curious about? So one of the substantive issues here is fracking, and in Western Pennsylvania in particular. If Kamala Harris goes to a place like, a non-Pittsburgh part of Western Pennsylvania, is she going to get pummeled because she has spoken out against fracking?
Well, she's backed away from that a little bit, just as Governor Shapiro has. But one of the things she needs to do is to put herself in a position where she answers critics, and answering critics is a part of this whole game. And she hasn't done any of that yet, and I think it would be good exercise for her. But you're right, fracking is a big problem for her. Just as more broadly, healthcare is a problem for her, and immigration.
Perhaps I'll take the next question, Tom. Some
Yeah, go ahead.
commentators have said that Donald Trump's support is more about identity politics than about policy he talks about. Could you comment on that? Isn't that something that is prevalent? It's not prevalent in our own country here in Canada. Can you react to that?
Well, I can start. It's undoubtedly true. I mean, I think it's it's at least as much cultural as it is policy, and it's a culture that Donald Trump has tapped into a sort of cultural resentments in this country, resentments among people who think they're not part of the East Coast establishment or the academic and intellectual establishment or the Hollywood entertainment establishment where all the money and all the power resides, and they're left to pick up the scraps. That's essentially what he has tapped into. Is that a true portrayal of America? Not entirely, of course, but there's some elements of truth to it. Plus, there's also the element that I mentioned before, which is that there is a great fear in that part of the population of sort of wild-eyed liberals taking over, opening the borders and letting immigrants come in unfettered and then making them all registered Democrats and winning elections unfairly. I mean, these are the things that circulate in the media ecosystem that Jackie referred to on the right, and they're well believed. They have nothing to do with economic policy or tax levels or foreign policy. They have to do with the feeling of whether the culture of America is safe from the left, and that's what Donald Trump plays into. He's a genius at playing into these insecurities, and essentially says, "They're against you, I'm with you. I'm going to stand in the way of those forces," and that's the basic core of his power and his attraction. It helps that he's completely willing to shift positions and tell untruths in pursuit of those voters. He says, for example, there's going to be a 10% tariff on everything that's imported into this country, period. That would have the effect of raising prices for almost that the people who support Donald Trump buy, not just imports from China, everything. But that doesn't translate, and the Democrats have not done a good job of translating that. But I'm just saying, what Trump supporters hear when he says that is he's tough, he's going to stand up against China. They don't think about the policy consequences. They think about the way it feels.
Yeah, I've got a question on particular
I want to add
aspects of it
something
later.
before
Go ahead, David.
across the street from the apartment where I live in Montreal, at the corner of Clark and St. Catherine Street, is where my mother went to high school, and where Leonard Cohen went to high school, and where Kamala Harris went to high school, Westmount High. And when my mother and Leonard Cohen went to that school, it was pretty much all white at Westmount High. You see the students who come to Westmount High School today, Monique, and they're not all white. And I think if you talk to Kamala Harris, and I've done some talking to her friends from the high school across the street from where I live, I think her Black identity was sealed, or was created and sealed at Westmount High School when she was 15 and 16 years old. She hung around with Black kids. She was in the dance or music, Black-oriented dance and music thing. That's part of her DNA. She later went from Westmount High to Howard University, which is a Black school. And so I think identity is part of American politics, and even North American politics, more than we might otherwise suggest.
Okay. Should we move on here, Monique? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Some longtime Republicans have said Mr. Trump's hold on the Republican Party is causing a profound danger to the party. What are your views on that? How do you see the party evolving over the longer term if he loses this election?
Jackie, you want to start?
I was going to nominate you, but okay.
I was gonna know, yeah.
I addressed this earlier in saying that only huge electoral losses from Trump on down will cause the party to reform at all. But I think the problem is that this has been the transformation of the Republican Party predates Donald Trump. He basically harnessed what was already there and had been underway for you could go back to the mid-90s when the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, helped win a majority for Republicans and introduced a sort of smash mouth brand of politics that was very different from anything we had seen before. They didn't really care about legislating. They just wanted to, it was, full-time overt campaigning, and in a mostly negative way, and putting a premium on division. And that's what you have now. The Republican, you went through the Tea Party, and then in the aughts, and then Donald Trump comes along and harnesses this and puts it this movement on steroids, this populist sort of us versus them politics. And I think it is a danger for the party, but they still win elections. So that's they've attracted people to the party who weren't attracted to politics before, and so this has been hard for many Republicans to just set aside. But like I say, this is the power Trump has is solely by virtue of the power over the base of the party. And that base has been radicalized and will be there if Trump is gone. I don't see anyone on the horizon who can really step in and harness it the way he has. I really don't see that person, but there's no going back to the old Republican Party. So it is going, take the issues that a lot of people on this call care about, like trade. The Republican Party was a completely pro-trade, free trade party. That's not true today. And it's not going to be true even when Donald Trump, at least for the short-term foreseeable future, when Donald Trump is gone from the scene.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think if he loses, Trump may go away. He also may not, by the way, but he probably will go away. But Trumpism will not go away. I mean, he has changed the party, whether you like to admit it or not. He has changed the Republican Party. It's a transformation that, as Jackie suggested, was underway before he arrived. He seized it and then galvanized it. But part of this is because of not what's happening among Republican Party leaders, but what's happening at the grassroots. The Republican Party has changed profoundly over the last 20 years in demographic terms. It's now much more a party of working class voters, mostly white, but not entirely white, and rural voters, as you suggested, Tom. And those people are much more comfortable with a populist message than with a traditionally conservative message, particularly on economics. And so you have a Republican Party that's now in favor of government activism in many ways for those people, is in favor of protectionism for those people in many ways, and is in favor of attacking big business when it is seen as not being helpful to those people. These are profoundly different views of what the Republican Party is than we would have seen, certainly when Reagan was running the show, but also when the Bushes were running the show. Those Republicans are gone. They're either out of the system entirely, or they've become independents, or they've become Democrats. And by the way, among those orphans in this process is the business community. The business community is no longer comfortable. At least it's not entirely comfortable in the Republican Party. It mostly hangs in there with Republicans under Trump, But that's mostly because they think that at the end of the day, even the Trump Republican Party will give them lower taxes and relatively less regulation. But they're not particularly welcome in this tent anymore, and they know it.
Yeah.
Nick?
Yeah, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is has been for years an institution that has difficult relations with the Republican members of Congress, the younger ones especially, who have come more recently. And I mean, but this has been underway again. I'll go back to Newt Gingrich's time, and this and the sort of people that came to Congress after his ascendancy. I can remember it was 1997 when I did a front page story in the Wall Street Journal about the fact that the NFIB, which this is the major organization for small businesses, you know, the local ones, those were the ones that were having impact in the Republican Party, not the corporations, which is not to say, you know, the Republicans are more than happy to still take big corporate money, but the corporate community has a lot of problems with Republicans these days.
Okay, I'm going to jump ahead here just because we're running out of time. We got some 3 or 4 essential questions that we want to ask. Monique and I want to ask, and I'm just going to jump forward while we're talking about trade, and we'll come back to what happens if Trump loses here. But on the trade act, does anyone really believe that Trump's proposal to put a 10% tariff on all imports would be good for the working class? His base of support, they would be paying the 10% increase, not Canada or China, the exporters. It would be the people who have consumed the products on these imports. The cost of everything would immediately go up. I don't understand why he would really continue to talk about this sort of thing, because the impact would be terrible. How do you reconcile this?
Well,
Terry?
look, it's don't overthink the problem. I mean, basically, he's saying is an extension of what he's been saying since he started running for president in 2015. It's just, we're all chumps. We're being taken advantage of by the Chinese and the Europeans, and they're flooding our market with their products. You're losing jobs as a result of that. Your pay is lower as a result of that. I'm going to fix it. How are you going to fix it? I'm going to put a tariff on everything that comes in. That means there'll be more U.S. manufacturing because there won't be so many imports. You'll have a job, and your job will pay more than it did before, period. I mean, you know, that's about as far as the economic analysis goes. Does it work that way in real life? No. I mean, we all know that's a overly simplistic way of looking at it. And in fact, the result is probably the opposite. But it's the message. The message is, I'm going to crack down on those foreigners who are taking advantage of us and treating us like chumps, and particularly the Chinese, but not only the Chinese, also the Europeans. And that plays, you know, reasonably well. The Democrats' job is to convince people that's not how it works in real life. But can they do that or not? You know, I don't know. We'll see. I will just say one thing we should all have learned is to kind of take Donald Trump at his word. When, you know, most of us thought he wouldn't do all the stuff on the North American Free Trade Agreement or trade with China that he's talked about in the 2016 campaign, and he did it, or at least he tried to do most of it. So I think you got to more or less take him at his word.
And Prime Minister Trudeau is the last person on earth who'd be able to talk him out of that vis-a-vis Canada.
Yeah, he's not a friend.
No, I mean, the imams in Iran would have a better chance than Trudeau of talking him out of that vis-a-vis Canada. So you can build.
Okay, we've got to move on here. Monique, I think you have a very essential question.
Well, I don't know if I have, but let me tell you that reading what I've been reading recently, what happens if Trump loses? What can we expect from here? It looks pretty bad.
Well, if Trump loses, there'll be the expected immigration from the United States to Canada will not occur. How's that? Beyond that, I can't say.
Civil unrest, violence. You know, people up here are worried about
that. People in Canada are more worried about it than people in the United States, I think, generally speaking.
Okay.
I see that you're not very eager to answer that question, none of you.
Well, I'm worried. Maybe I'm more worried than they are. But on the other hand, the jailing of hundreds of people who took part in January 6th, by many accounts, has had a deterrent effect. It's literally taken some of the actors off the streets that would be the ones most likely to lead a civil unrest if Trump loses. And there's a number of times, like his trials, for instance, he really was disappointed that not more people didn't show up to his trials. And, he was convicted without much of any reaction at all from his folks, except that he did, harden his support in the polls among them, but as if that's possible. But I think, we have to be wary because this isn't hypothetical. We lived through January 6th. And we've had a number of incidents of violence, even deaths, when he said something that got, I'm more worried, I think, about lone actors than I am about organized protest at this point. So I'll leave it at that.
I agree with that. I agree with
I
that.
agree.
I will just say two things. As I said before, I just don't think Donald Trump will say on the day after or the week after the election, you're right, I lost. It was a fair election and I got beat. He's just not going to say that. He can't say that. It's not in his Constitution. He's already setting up the arguments to not say that. So that's the first thing. The second question then becomes, what are the consequences of that? I think maybe Jackie's right that people have figured out that game has played its course on a mass level. But I do worry about individual people. I worry about corrosion to the system as that is fought out politically and legally. And I do think there will be random crazy people who will decide to take it upon themselves to do something about it. Not massively, but disruptively on a smaller scale. I think there's a reasonably good chance of that.
Okay, we're going to start the question period here with a number of questions that are coming in. But just before we get there, I think it's essential for Canadian audience here is that will the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Canada-Mexico-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, will it survive a Trump presidency? How do you feel about that? With Jerry, the Wall Street Journal, I don't know if if your colleagues there discuss this sort of thing.
I think it will, because Trump and fancies himself as the guy who fixed it. I fixed it when I was the president. It's okay now, so I fixed it. So I don't think it's imperiled. I think he's got his sights trained elsewhere on China and on Europe mostly. I could be wrong, but you don't hear it anymore from Trump people. Their trade and artillery guns are pointed elsewhere right now. And as I said, if he has to go do something about it, it would be a way of admitting that he didn't really fix it in the first term. And that's not what he does. That's my view. I could be completely wrong.
I agree with Jerry. I covered the original NAFTA in the 90s as a congressional reporter, and Trump's, I forget what he calls it, USMCA. I think he's got pride of authorship in that, and which is not to say he won't strain it mightily with tariffs on Canada.
Okay, we've got some questions coming in here on there's something having to do with with violence here. That someone said, I can't believe what I saw when the MAGA candidate for governor of North Carolina said some people need killing. Isn't that just going to really in turn kill his candidacy for governor by saying something like that? Has this, this is amazing. A candidate for governor saying some people need killing. Maybe comment on that. Is this taking root? This sort of commentary on from major political figures. It's just incredible.
Well, that North Carolina candidate for governor, I think, is going to lose, in part because that's not the worst of the statements that's about as bad as it gets. But he's made a number of statements like that, and he's way behind in the polls right now. Democrats feel pretty good about their candidate for governor, Josh Stein, for what is now what is an open seat.
Okay. All right. The question from someone here is how does the international community view the U.S. presidential race? you seeing evidence of that? You know, that are global leaders and markets concerned about potential shift in U.S. foreign policy, trade agreements, and alliances? Are they more focused on the implications for global stability and economic partnerships? I think it all comes into play. But is this being recognized by people in the United States that this really, the concern internationally is amazing about all of this? And Jerry and Jackie and David, you know, in terms of the people in Washington, are they watching this or do they care?
I've been trying to sell to the Boston Globe and to the Wall Street Journal and to others a piece about how Canadians are worried about this issue. And maybe it's because it's about Canada, but I don't think so. I don't think American voters care about what people in Ottawa or Saskatoon or London or Paris or Moscow or any place think about the election. I just don't think it's a factor.
But I'll say this, I mean, Trump obviously thinks some Americans care because it's a staple of his stump speeches that he says we're a laughing stock of the world and people overseas are laughing at us. And of course, the irony is that they truly were laughing when they weren't scared of Donald Trump. And you have on video Justin Trudeau and among others at a foreign summit caught on video literally laughing about what Donald Trump had said and done that day. So, but it is a staple of Trump's speeches, but he talks about it in terms that are like everything else, the opposite of reality.
I'm actually glad you raised this, Tom, because I think it doesn't get enough attention. I mean, people in NATO are really scared. People in Ukraine are petrified and should be. That if Trump wins, the game is over. Donald Trump said this week, when he had his little interview with Elon Musk on X, that Putin and Xi of China and Kim of North Korea are geniuses. I mean, so what does that tell you exactly? So, and you do kind of have to, as I said before, you have to take him at his word on some of these things. He says, I'll end the Ukraine war in a day. Well, the only way to end the war in Ukraine in a day is to cut off aid to Ukraine and make them negotiate a deal with Putin in which they give away a third of their country. That's the only way you can end that war in a day. So is that what he's talking about? Does Article 5 of the NATO charter hold under Donald Trump? I mean, people who work for him say yes, it would, but you know, I don't know. There's legitimate reason for concern. And what is on the flip side, what does American support for Israel mean if Kamala Harris wins the presidency? Bibi Netanyahu has real reason to be concerned about the other outcome. I think there's plenty of support for Israel in the political system writ large, but it wouldn't be the same. So there are big consequences on the international stage. It's recognized by people overseas. As David suggests, it's not so recognized by people here, but it's important.
I have a question here from someone who was saying that they're surprised. That's not the only question about this aspect. Is they're surprised that there's not more comeback, or shall we say fact check, on the lies, or the dubious sort of accuracy of. In other words, the lies of Trump. Okay, concern about the fact the media do not seem to spend much attention on correcting the obvious misinformation that comes out of Trump's mouth from time to time. And maybe you can comment on that. You guys are all in the media. Is this kind of like a lost cause, or why did the media spend more time in correcting his inaccuracies, shall we say, or his lies?
Well, I think that's all over the media. We have all baked in the notion that Trump's statements are not congruent. Often are not congruent with reality or the truth. But I think the New York Times and the Post are all over him day after day after day. Now, his supporters don't Washington Post and the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but it's hard to avoid these truth checks. I think they're everywhere.
Okay. All right. There's a question here from someone's commenting about the comments of the commentary of Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC about he's blasting the media over Trump coverage, 2016 all over again, which is basically giving him. As I remember seeing the show, I think it referred to the fact that he was getting generally a free ride from the media. And I wonder if you have any perspective on this, if you're aware of that. You've seen those his commentary on on CNN or MSNBC. That's just I've said that we're going to post the questions for people, and so I'm doing that, and I wonder if that's something that you have seen, or what you believe about the free ride, the media of Trump. That I don't see it, but I don't see the free ride. But there's an observation. Somebody thought that Lawrence O'Donnell, MSNBC, was saying that he's getting a free ride.
Yeah, let me echo what David said there. I don't think it is. Remember when Donald Trump was president, the Washington Post had a running weekly, if not daily, feature in which it chronicled the lies Donald Trump had told, and the count was up into the hundreds, if not the thousands, by the end. When Trump did his press conference down at Mar-a-Lago, every news organization, well, the big news organizations, the Times, the Post, and us, had running blogs that said that wasn't true, that wasn't true, that wasn't true. I don't think that there's a lack of attention to the fact that Trump says things that are not true all the time. I think everybody knows that at this point, and I think the press continues to point it out. Does it matter to voters? I mean, to some it does, and to some it doesn't. But I don't think anybody is unaware that that's what's going on. And by the way, if you read emails and text messages that I get, there's a refrain on the other side now that says, "Oh, Kamala Harris is getting a free pass. She's getting a free pass. She's getting a free pass. She doesn't answer any questions. She doesn't do press conference. You guys are letting her have a free pass." So, to some extent, as a journalist, if you're in this place where you're getting criticized from both sides, maybe you're not that far off. So that's my perspective on it. Jackie may have a different view. I don't know.
Well, I do think.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jack. I'd like to ask a question then, Tom.
I think the press
Yeah,
still
sure.
struggles with how to cover Trump. And, I was, of two minds when he had his press conference last week that was so commented upon for its craziness. But, and he's going to have another one. It's today, right? At Mar-a-Lago, or at his New Jersey residence. And he's just trying to get attention, seize back attention that's been going to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. But I'm a little troubled by the, start to finish when he goes on for an hour and a half and more, and just is a fire hose of untruths. But I will say this I don't think it should be all covered. At the same time, voters need to see the unadulterated Donald Trump, I think, to some extent. I don't want to see from now till the election that every time he decides to hold a press conference from the, bosom of his clubs, that he's going to get it, complete coverage. But I will say that just as one footnote to everything is that in the long careers now that Jerry and David and I have had, and all the presidents we've covered back to Ronald Reagan, and to some extent even Jimmy Carter, I dare say, never used the verb or the noun lie in regard to any other candidate or president. And with Donald Trump, it's become a staple of reporting, and it's a fact of life. It's if his lips are moving, he's lying. And so I think to that, that alone, that one word tells you that the press is covering him differently. Of course, he's different from anybody else we've ever covered.
Tom, I would just as a footnote here, I would encourage those on the call here who have access to the Wall Street Journal to go look up a column that my former colleague, Jerry Baker, who writes an opinion column for the Journal, who's as conservative and has been pro-Trump as occasionally pro-Trump, always very conservative, way on the right, wrote after that Mar-a-Lago press conference. And it basically says, you know, we need to talk about Donald Trump. There's something wrong here. Here are all the things he said at that press conference that were just not true, that were lies. And he lists them all and says, this is a problem. This transcends what partisan discussion. This is clearly, he's like losing something. So, you know, that even in the conservative editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal, that notion is now out there. So it's not going unexplored.
I think you had a question.
Yeah, I had a question because Mr. Trump has been very good at painting, giving an identity, and he started to do that at Harris and about racism comments. And remember when he treated Hillary as crooked Hillary, it did stick to Hillary. Is this going to be very important right now, or do you think it's going to backfire what he's doing?
I think the biggest question, I had a conversation with a big Democrat today in Pittsburgh. I think and we were talking about this. Is there a time in which people get tired of the Trump act? I don't mean act in a disparaging way. I mean the Trump persona, the Trump way of campaigning, the Trump rhetoric. And people have dismissed, you know, for
send a short email saying, need to know exactly.
People have been saying for 7 years, that now it's the end for Trump. And maybe this is yet another one of those examples doesn't turn out to be true. But I wonder if people are bored and tired of this and have decided to basically ignore it or to be turned off by it. What do you two others think? Has it come to a time where people just have had enough of this and dismiss it?
Jackie?
Oh,
I think you're muted, Jackie.
you're muted, Jackie.
Okay, we can
Yes,
come back to this.
I was
Sure.
reading something in the group chat directed at me, so I didn't hear the comment.
And
The notion that the Trump Act has gone stale.
Well, I'll just chime in. I do think that's a possibility. I'm hearing people discuss that for the first time. That the power of the Trump Act was the shock value, and that was the whole point of it. And he knew that. People aren't shocked anymore. And this goes back to the conversation about whether we need to keep telling people he's lying. I think everybody kind of has gotten the message. Some people care, some people don't. But one of the reasons people think, and I'm including here a lot of Republicans and some Trump supporters who are a bit panicky right now, is they kind of think that the more he thinks he's being challenged and maybe in trouble, the deeper he goes into the deep end of the swimming pool, and that he sounds more irrational, and that turns off people. So I think maybe the act is not just worn thin. It may get to the point where it's counterproductive. I mean, part of me thinks that maybe what Trump does every day now when he says something is he climbs into the enemy bunker and starts handing them ammunition for their artillery guns. So yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, we're at a point now before Labor Day where people are paying attention, but not that much attention. I'm talking about average voters. Get past Labor Day and people are paying attention. I think we get a pretty good reading on this interesting question of whether the whole act is now worn so thin that people are turned off by it. I just don't know, but I don't dismiss the possibility.
You know, after a while, Don Rickles was a lot of fun for a long while, and after a while, it kind of became boring.
Yeah.
And I think
getting down to the nitty gritty here about the election and going back to that, this it's all about the swing voters in in those 6 or 7 states. What are the best strategies to winning the swing voters? What are the means to reach them? How does either party get to these swing voters to like the MAGA crowd, and even an expanded MAGA crowd, rural don't read the New York Times, they don't read the Washington Post, etc., or the Wall Street Journal, as a matter of fact, and so they don't watch these television chains either. How do you get to them, the swing voters?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that how few of them there really are. I mean, in our poll, the number of people who were truly undecided in a head-up, straight Trump versus Harris match was 4%. The universe of people who are persuadable, which is to say they're undecided or only leaning toward one or the other, is only 11%. So the slice of, and this probably holds true across swing states too, the slice of people who are really available and persuadable and genuinely undecided is incredibly small. So I think the first thing you do if you're trying to win the swing states in your Kamala Harris is you make sure that you get your base vote out. And that's what Trump is specialized in, right? But the Democrats were not doing that when Biden was the nominee. Harris has the chance to do that. So I think the first thing you do is recognize how few undecided voters there are and make sure your voters are enthused and are guaranteed to show up. The second thing is, I think a lot of people who are genuinely undecided probably have to be reached in different ways, through social media, peer-to-peer contact. I mean, they're much more likely to be persuaded by people they know who say, you really should vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, than they are by something they read in the New York Times, because as you suggest, they're not reading the New York Times. So I think that grassroots politics in swing states is really important and probably underrated. That's my view anyway. Jackie may have a different thought.
Yeah, I agree.
Great.
I have a question from someone here, has to deal with foreign affairs. What is the likely impact of a Trump presidency for the ongoing genocide in Gaza? In other words, what would happen to the Israeli Gaza situation if Trump takes power in January? Assuming it's going to, that sort of situation is going to continue.
Well, I was just going to say, my first prediction would be that if he wins, it'll be over by the time he takes office, because I don't think Netanyahu wants to put himself in a position in which he undermines his relationship with Trump by continuing the Gaza problem as we're seeing it now, as it's defined now. So I think Trump would have the happy advantage of not inheriting the Gaza problem the way we're thinking of it. Then you get to the broader question of what would be done to fix the problem. And there, I think you would have pretty much unfettered support for the Israeli government. And I would say that the government of Netanyahu has a much better chance of surviving the medium to long term if Donald Trump's president than if Kamala Harris is president.
Yeah, Jerry, can I ask you a question? So do you sense that that Trump is impatient and skeptical of the Palestinian cause and therefore it will be over?
No, what I'm saying is I think that Netanyahu will have cleaned up the mess by the time Trump takes office, so that he confront that possibility. And I
That's
think
a big mess to clean up in 5 months.
Well, I'm talking about the active fighting as we're seeing it right now. I think that'll be over. Whatever the Iranians are going to do to extract their revenge, they will have done. I think that the Israelis will have tamped down Hezbollah. I'm just saying, in the period between now and next January, the tactical situation on the ground will probably change significantly. I think the problem is that, as I see it, because I think the only solution is a two-state solution. You have to figure out a way to go back to that. I think Trump's interest and willingness to really engage on that is de minimis, and without presidential engagement on that question, nothing is going to happen in terms of movement in that direction. That's what concerns me about it. Joe Biden spends a lot of time on this problem. Does Donald Trump have the patience to spend a lot of time on the Palestinian problem? I don't think so.
Monique, I think you had another question to.
Listen, it's been addressed, but basically, the U.S. has been very important for NATO. You addressed that a bit earlier. I think you mentioned that the electorate is not very concerned about what the international community thinks, but definitely NATO is very important. I wonder what will happen to NATO if Mr. Trump is elected. He's very much close to NATO. He has been in the past.
Well, I can start. When I did the book that Tom kindly referred to at the top, Trump's former chief of staff, General Kelly, told me he thought if there was a second Trump term that he would in fact withdraw the U.S. from NATO. that was in 2020, not now. And I don't think that would happen because it's not that easy to do. And in fact, Congress has taken steps since then to make it harder for a president to unilaterally withdraw from NATO. I do the strength of the NATO alliance, which has actually increased significantly since the invasion of Ukraine, would start to erode again. And that worries me. And if it worries people who are observing it, you have to also worry about what Vladimir Putin's calculations would be about the cohesiveness and the vigor of NATO. And I think it's a significant problem. And it plays out most immediately in Ukraine, but it plays out more broadly across the kind of the great struggle that Putin wants to continue between Russia and the West.
Going back to other questions here we've got from the audience, and one of them has to deal with what would happen to the Trump presidency to the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which have been very, very strong economic stimuli for the Biden administration. How do you see that playing out? Would he just let go with that? There's billions of dollars of investments that are involved in this sort of thing that are going to continue in for the next few years. How do you see that playing out if he takes the presidency?
Well,
the Inflation Reduction Act and all of that.
Right. He has said that he wants to get rid of that. In particular, they target the spending and the projects that have to do with clean energy. The problem with that is that any analysis of where the money is going will show you that roughly 60%, more than a majority of it, is going to red districts, Republican districts. And you have Republicans in Congress who are going out to ribbon cuttings and taking credit for these projects, despite the fact they voted against the law. So I think it will be, like a lot of things, harder for Trump to actually go through with it than he makes it sound. That said, a Trump administration that is in control of the executive branch and the energy department and the EPA, et cetera, can do a lot to effectively discontinue implementing things or implementing them in a way that arguably was not intended.
Yeah, the infrastructure stuff is going to have a hard time turning down, particularly in red districts, as Jackie says. But it goes into all 435 districts. It's an awfully big ask to try to get rid of all that.
Well, Nick, I'm seeing these questions. Do you mind if I continue?
Continue. Yeah, I wanted to ask them about Agenda 25.
Yes,
is that going
right.
to be very relevant?
Project 2025. This whole thing that was 900-page report, about how America should be organized. Let's put it that way, for lack of a better term. Project 2025. Is that?
I think it's a very legitimate question. I think it matters. I entered this picture back in 1980 when Reagan won the election, and the Heritage Foundation, the same organization that did the Project 2025 report, produced something called Blueprint for America, which was equally massive. And if you go back and look at it, and I did when I was doing the book, a lot of it didn't happen. A lot of it just ended up on the roadside. But elements of it were actually guiding principles for the Reagan administration for the next 8 years. So I think Project 2025 really does matter. It is contrary to what Trump says. It is drawn up by people who are in fact his supporters and who in fact would probably become part of a new Trump administration. A lot of it is overstated and pie in the sky from the right, but a lot of it matters. And I think it's a legitimate subject to be raised. I think Donald Trump agrees with that, by the way, or he wouldn't be running away from it as hard as he is.
And I think the one reason he's running away from it is for what it says about abortion. It's very extreme on reproductive rights, and to the extent that it would have a federal ban on the abortion medications that are now account for 68% of abortions in this country, and ban the mailing of those, and which would just be one make it affect that all the red states where you have bans on abortion, you would have no way of getting it through the mail. So Trump is worried about it, but everything else in Project 25, as far as I could tell, and I've tried to get through all 900 pages. Luckily, it's not all text, but it's most of it, other than the abortion stuff, are things that he himself has called for. And so I do think, you know, in terms of putting meat on the bones of what he has called for, because God knows he never gets into the details of any policy if he talks about policy at all. But the other thing about Project 25 is part of that. They have a data bank of 20,000 names, I think is currently the size, of people who have essentially been vetted as MAGA loyalists and who would populate the federal government, the executive branch, if he gets elected. And so, you know, unlike in 2017, when he took over as president, that he would be able to hit the ground running, putting loyalists in power, in place. And in
I've got a last question here. We're getting towards the end, almost close to 1 o'clock Eastern. But, and I think this is fundamental to understanding what's going on in the United States. From my perspective, Jerry, Jackie, and David, what are the potential long-term consequences for American society if the promotion of alternative realities continues to be a significant element in U.S. politics?
Well, you know,
The alternative realities. It's just
you're talking to people who are steeped in the old-fashioned values of journalism and inquiry, that a thing to be transmitted has to be true. Now, that's an old-fashioned notion, but the three of us hew to it with great devotion, religious devotion. And so we have a stake, all three of us, in the survival of that ethic. It is the bedrock of what we do, and it troubles me at least, terribly, to think that those values are old-fashioned. You know, when I was the editor of a newspaper, someone said, well, you know, you're from the old school. And I say, well, I'm not only from the old school, I'm the dean of the old school. And so we believe in this, and we think that I think, I want to talk from my friends and colleagues here, that it is a bigger danger than anything in the election right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree, but I'll just close with one optimistic thought, which is I think that cycle will eventually end without the idea of truth being completely destroyed in this country, because I think people will recognize the reality of it for what it is. Not that they are today, but that eventually I think that ship will right itself and we'll reach some equilibrium, but not now, and maybe not in the immediate aftermath of this election. It's a big concern.
Okay, this Monique, you know, I'd appreciate if you could thank our panelists. You know, this it's probably 85–90% of the audience here are Quebecers, French-speaking Quebecers, des Québécois, and I think this has been great for people to understand. So I turn it over to you, Monique, you know, to close this off.
Well, listen, we are so grateful that you took the time, the three of you, three major journalists with the highest reputation that you could expect, that you took the time to listen, to take those questions, answer them. And we rely, frankly, the people of Canada rely on people like you to correct statements, to enlighten us, and we follow what you're writing all the time. And we thank you very, very much. I'm sure that all the participants, and there were many of them today, listening to what you had to say, and we learned a lot, and we're very, very grateful. And I thank you in the name of Tom and myself and all the listeners as well. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
This is being recorded, and if people want the recording, please let us know by email if they would like to get the link to the recording of this conversation, as they will be free to share with friends and colleagues if they wish. Merci. Thank you.
Au revoir. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Jerry, David, and Jackie.